Welcome to Biota Live. I'm Tom Barbalet, and this is a continuation of the Biota podcasts. For more information on the Biota podcasts, check out biota.org/podcast. We have two callers on the line.
It's Gerald calling.
Oh, hello, Gerald. How are you?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. A long time no chat.
Yeah.
And I'll bring in our second caller. Hello, second caller.
Yes, this is Ed from Indiana again.
Hi, Ed. Good to talk to you again. As you're both aware, we have news and notes. We have the potential of two further callers who said they might call in, but I'll get on with the news and notes. Next episode, Friday, September 5th at 8 p.m. Pacific, Spore Till You Snore. We're guaranteeing more unique coverage than you'll probably see with regards to Spore anywhere else. We should have Travis Savo on the podcast, but sadly, Steve Grant has given his apology. Steve has given 2 magazine interviews with regards to Spore, and now he is working on his own project. He did, however, promise that he would give us the first interview and beta preview associated with his new game project, which should be out within the next 3 months, according to Steve. So more from Steve Grant in the very near future. I wanted to give a shout-out to Jamie Matthews, who handed in his master's thesis today. So congratulations out to Jamie. It's going to be very interesting to hear what he does in the future. And similarly, we may have Larry Yeager on this call this evening. But if we don't have Larry on this evening, he said that he would appear in the Biota Live following the Spore Biota Live. So in 2 weeks' time, if we don't hear from Larry tonight, we will have Larry Yeager on the podcast, which will be wonderful. No doubt we'll try to get you back on Ed as well so you can talk about Graytham, Indiana, amongst other things. So a lot of correspondence through the week, some of it related to an idea of Biota Live Lite. And what that relates to is a reduced bitrate version of the podcast for folks who have dial-up connections or similarly slow connections. I heard from Herv Noel in Saudi Arabia, and I've also heard from previous listeners, folks like Melik Kutash in Jordan, and Miriam English, who is somewhere in Queensland in Australia, and she only has a dial-up connection as well, and they had asked that a lower bandwidth version of Biota Live be produced. Well, that's relatively easy. If you've heard in the previous 2 episodes, I now divide the news and notes and the main topic with a little audio break. However, what I will do with Biota Live Lite is provide the news and notes in a separate audio file to the main topic to reduce the downloads even more. If this is something that interests you, please get in contact with me, tom@noble8.com, because this is still something that's in the planning phase, and I'd like to have more feedback before I started unrolling it. Graytham-related news. Well, there was a Graytham Silicon Valley meeting on Tuesday past, August 26th. I'm calling it Graytham Unplugged, in part because it was a small, intimate group sitting around talking about Scott Davis's Mars simulation project. Scott said that he had originally planned to give a standard presentation, but it basically turned into a working group from what I've heard. Unfortunately, it wasn't videotaped or audio recorded. In fact, I'd requested Scott do his presentation primarily for my own selfish motives to actually have a chance to see Scott's work, but apparently a lot of good feedback came through that, and hopefully Scott will do a second report in a few months' time with regards to the feedback that was given. So once again, I'm going to read out the Graytham locations, primarily because there have been 2 new locations added in Canada, Graytham, Toronto, and Graytham, Montreal. If you are in either of those locales, and I know we have a number of Biota Live listeners in both those locations, please get in contact with me, tom@noble8.com. We were hoping to have Adam Eremenko from Graytham, Boston on this evening. He would talk a little bit more about the mailing lists that are being created. But to run through the lists again, obviously the new chapters in Graytham, Toronto, Graytham, Montreal, Graytham, Boston, obviously, Graytham, San Francisco Bay Area / Silicon Valley, Graytham, London. Gerald, Graytham, Benelux. What are the plans with regard to the next meeting?
I've been discussing it with the Joost Rechtveld, the guy who is going to be able to present or give us access to a perfect location for it, and we're setting it up for towards the end of September. Yeah, we haven't picked a date yet, but we're working on that.
Okay, so for folks listening in, I will keep you updated, as I'm sure Gerald would. I was hoping to have Rudolph on as well. He said he may call in. I know it's probably early your time, but he said he wanted to contribute with regards to the topic today. So we may hear from Rudolph when his alarm goes off and he can add more information to that. Greatham Brighton as well. There was potential with regards to Brighton and London linking up. I haven't heard any more on that. I was hoping Adam Eremenko could talk a little bit more about that. The Greatham LA group, I have to give shout out again to Brian Allen, who made contact, and Brian told me that he'd actually been to a Greatham San Francisco meeting. So he's probably the linking San Francisco-LA connection there. But if you're in the LA area, there seem to be a lot of interesting people from a diverse set of fields that are looking to come together in Greatham, Los Angeles. Now, Greatham, Indiana, obviously, Ed, we have you on the line again, but my hope was to have Larry Yeager on either tonight or in 2 weeks' time, and certainly when we have him on either tonight or in 2 weeks, we will talk a lot more with regards to the potential of Greatham, Indiana, because I think between the two of you will be possibly even a two-location Greatham, similar to Greatham, San Francisco, Silicon Valley. They seem to move quite neatly on alternative months with regards to their two locations. Greatham, New York, my understanding is that the inaugural meeting will be in October sometime, mid-October, when Bruce Damer is going through and Adam Eremenko will also be coming down. But by all means, if you're in the New York area and you want to get together with like-minded folk, I think they'll probably have a meeting prior to the main big meeting. So get in contact with me, tom@noble8.com, and similar to the LA group, actually, a diverse group of people that are coming together in Greatham, New York. It's going to be very exciting what comes out of that Greatham. Greatham, North Carolina, it's another interesting link of a wide variety of areas, a couple of universities, obviously more than a couple, and a wide variety of companies that will bring together a number of interesting people. Greatham, Melbourne. I was contacted by another fellow in Melbourne during the week, and I think it's going to be again, probably an academic-heavy group in Melbourne. There seem to be a lot of academics in the Melbourne area that have contacted me with regards to Greatham, Melbourne. And I say it every week. They're listening to us live in Second Life. A shout-out to Natalie and Dick Gordon in Greatham, Second Life. I understand Dick's travelling currently, so maybe it's just Natalie and other like-minded folk in Second Life, potentially even Bruce Damer. So I got a lot of feedback from the last show. I think Zan touched a number of points that obviously people were very receptive to, and we're certainly going to have Zan back on. Gerald, you listened to last week's show, I'm sure. What was your general feelings with regards to Zan's ideas?
I'm sorry, Tom, I haven't had the chance to listen to it quite yet.
Loyal listener, Gerald. I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. I have heard from people that were listening to it only yesterday, so I'm sure you're going to have a great deal of fun. And maybe next time Zan comes on, you should be on as well, because I think she's got a lot of interesting ideas with regards to your favourite topic, reclaiming the term intelligent design. So I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun with regards to last week's show. I'll get your feedback after you've listened to it, I guess. As I said last week, I'd like to have Zan back on to talk about the future. I mean, she has a lot of interesting connections. She studied with Buckminster Fuller, Gerald.
Yeah, I enjoyed her talk at the Greatham San Francisco, and so I was looking forward to listening to it. I just haven't had the chance yet.
Not a problem. You're a busy man. That's understandable. Now, in one of her correspondence, she actually sent me some of the primary stuff that Buckminster Fuller had written on her behalf and things like that. It was actually quite fascinating. Many, many areas that can be discussed with regards to Zan, as I think folks who heard last week's show will testify. And Ed, I mean, you were on the show last week. What kind of food for thought did Zan leave you with?
Mostly just she had some really interesting environmental ideas. So that was one I pondered all week long and drew up some plans for it and thought about it and went, that environmental idea of pressures affecting the mutations in bodies and in the evolution of things was made me think a lot all the week long.
Yeah, I think she's someone who just has jammed with a lot of brilliant folk. Some of those jams, I think, then very heavily into what we've discussed in Biota Live to date, but a number have a potential to spin off into future discussions, and certainly that's the kind of collective feedback that I received. But Ed, as we have you on, would you like to give some introduction to who you are and some background into how you found the podcast and your interests in artificial life?
I'm an electrical engineer by training, but I have never worked as an electrical engineer. I went right into IT and started programming, and been programming Perl for a couple of years now. And I went from different companies through their IT folk, and then I landed at Lilly And now I've moved into bioinformatics and deal with more science and science research. So I'm really fascinated. It's really cool, really good field. Lots of discovery. It's kind of like the Wild West show here. You can pretty much write any code you want and do genetic algorithms to find things, do large computational searches, lots of databases to search through. So as I'm thinking through what my scientists ask me for, and I'm trying to build them code and interfaces and algorithms, I started thinking, well, why don't I have a virtual kind of playground? Why can't I build an environment that has all these pressures and then subject different pressures to it and watch things grow computational-wise? I mean, we do it in a laboratory all the time in the wet lab. Why can't we really get something going and off the ground that I can at least go in there and throw in a mutation, have photons hit something, generate, and have it build maybe crystal structures and adjust them, tweak them, and see how they join together, understand the physics of things. We're getting really down into understanding the crystallized structure, trying to understand how that works because of the bindings between chemicals. And, of course, drugs are very much important in that realm of understanding how those bind to our chemicals that are free ions that float through our body, or our lipids in our membranes, or anything else. But those lower chemicals, or those lower macromolecules, aren't really controlled by genetics. They're really controlled by something else, something even lower. So I'm kind of going, okay, how is that built? So I'm trying to figure out a program that will understand that lower, understand and build those macromolecules up, and then maybe attach things to it, and have an environment that will allow me to tweak those, or even visualize them, just plain out visualize how they can grow. So that's what I'm working on, and that's why. And I found your podcast just kind of, I was on my iPod, and I listened to Floss Weekly. So I'm kind of a trade-off from that. I listen to them and, participate in a few open source projects. So those Perl's all open source. So I write mainly in that. So that's how I kind of found the podcast.
So you're amongst like-minded folk, and obviously, particularly with regards to structures. I mean, this has been Gerald's wonder with regards to artificial life, and even prior to artificial life. Have you heard Gerald on any previous podcasts talk about that, Ed?
Yes, I think I have. I want to say I did.
Gerald, a question to you. I'm not sure if you heard the Jamie Matthews chat with regards to Artificial Life 11, but they seem to have had a tensegrity, at least a tensegrity paper, if not a tensegrity track at Artificial Life 11. Have you had a chance to look through the Artificial Life 11 publications, and do you know of other Artificial Life tensegrity projects?
I listened to the Jamie's interview, but I don't remember anything about tensegrity specifically. But I've downloaded the proceedings, so I'm going to be reading that through when I get a chance. By the way, last night I created my very first physical, actual tensegrity at the architect's office, because otherwise, they're not really convinced by things virtual. So I have to create something physical.
And what did you make it out of?
I've got a couple of materials. It's sort of nylon, plasticky stuff. It wasn't that successful, by the way. Very tricky to build. It's a good first try, and I learned a lot. And the next one will be better. So I have to actually build something and be able to give it to people and put it in their hands before they're convinced that it could play a role in architecture. So that's the challenge for right now.
Yes, I imagine kind of magnets attached to rubber bands or something like that, but I can't see how you get hard structure out of that. There seem to be a lot of toys that are almost tensegrity-like. When I lived in the UK, there were educational toy stores that I'd walked past, and they seemed to have, I'm not sure how rubbery they were, but they seemed to have balls and magnet cups at either end with kind of rubbery bits in between. So maybe you need to look into current educational toys in that regard, and you may find
usually those are very, very, very simple, and it's just like one little item, one little thing you can hold in your hand. I've seen that. There's this thing called a tensegra toy, which is just 6 bars and elastics around it. You can find it in a lot of kids stores. But what I'm talking about is creating which I haven't quite done yet, but I'm trying to create a whole column of tensegrity so that can be applied in architecture. So it's a bit of a challenge. I'm still not sure how I'm going to be able to integrate evolution into it, but every once in a while I see some opportunities, because it's going to be at some point a question of fine-tuning, and then genetic algorithm will be probably a good idea.
It sounds like the architects of the selection pressure in some regard.
Yeah, to some degree that'll be true, but there's going to be, the thing is, there's too much complexity to deal with for a person, so they might be some part of the selection pressure, but like I've been trying to do from the beginning with Darwin at Home, I'm trying to combine both an algorithm and human influence. Selection pressure is a combination of those two, so that you don't have to worry about capturing absolutely everything in your fitness function.
So the question for this week came through a kind of convoluted set of emails that I had with Bruce Damer probably about 3 weeks ago now, with regards to Scott Davis's demonstration at Graythumb. And Bruce was concerned that there was still a relatively tight definition with regards to what artificial life was, and that it needed to have some, at least tacit connection back to something that looked like genetic algorithms or things of this nature in order to be classified as artificial life that a Graythumb could support. And as you may guess from previous narratives, my sense was that if there wasn't artificial life in Scott Davis's Mars simulation, there certainly would be after he presented it at Graythumb, and I think that may be the feedback from the Graythumb Unplugged of Tuesday night, although I'll wait for more from Scott and the other participants with regards to that. But it did pose a relatively interesting question with regards to the role of genetic algorithms in contemporary artificial life, and whether there was a class of contemporary artificial life that didn't have to contain genetic algorithms, or where the genetic algorithms were so completely abstracted as not to really be connected to the original genetic algorithms. And then another thing happened. I am doing chapter review currently for Nature-Inspired Informatics, which means that I need to be relatively careful with regards to my descriptions associated with this, but a majority of the chapters that I have reviewed have been with regards to the cutting edge associated with genetic programming and genetic algorithms. And the thing that struck me reading through these chapters is that both these, well, genetic programming is a subset of genetic algorithms, but both these fields have moved in a distinctly different direction over the past decade, over the past 15 years, than how they were originally adapted in Carl Sims' Blockies and various other movement-based genetic algorithm artificial life simulations. So here we have two different directions, the kind of cutting edge associated with genetic algorithms and genetic programming. Genetic programming in particular I found fascinating, and it's a pity we don't have Adam Eremenko on to discuss his own. Was Adam Eremenko's project called Nanopond, or was it Micropond, Gerald?
It was Nanopond. That was just one of several projects he's done.
Yeah, I couldn't remember whether it was nano or micro, but there is another project called Micropond. I'm actually looking forward to, I don't know if either of you eat sushi, but I'm looking forward to Pond Zoo coming out in the near future. I think if you're thinking of creating a future pond, perhaps call it Pond Zoo. So in terms of genetic algorithms and genetic programming, Gerald, do you keep up to date with the kind of current literature?
I can't spend all the time pouring through papers or anything like that. No, that would be a full-time job.
Certainly, what struck me was that it moved, and there was a lot of beauty in there as well. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into it to identify the specific chapters that I reviewed, but there were things associated with what you've discussed in terms of Darwin at Home, planets and islands and isolated entities and evolution, which was being used in a very applied fashion with regards to genetic programming in particular. Ed, where has your reading been with regards to genetic algorithms, and do you feel that you kind of enter the discussion with a contemporary understanding?
I love the wiki, so I'm a wiki guy. So if the wiki's up to date, then I'm up to date. So I pretty much read the wiki for the genetic programming, genetic algorithm, and I kind of read off onto the extended links here and there. So did a little research last week just to make sure I was ready for this week. I do like some pieces of it, but some pieces I go, well, the genetic algorithm is really kind of like a search function. So I use that starting to use that more like every day, but I don't know if I could say I've actually, seen someone else's genetic algorithm code other than what was on the wiki. It was very interesting. It's basically a lot of searching, a lot of comparing, which we use a lot today because there's huge databases, thousands of analyses, and trying to go through and figure out how those all relate and what the comparisons between, genotypes and phenotypes are is very important research today. And I think most biotechs are doing that. And a lot of the other, I listen to proteomics podcasts, and they talk periodically about, using algorithms to find those relationships to build, biomarkers. That's pretty cool. The genetic programming, it seems it has the fitness function and fitness landscape component, which, sometimes I say I like it, but then sometimes I say, well, I don't like it. I'd rather just, if I want to say that this is evolving in its life, then just let it evolve in life. But I know you have to have some degree of, well, when does it become so that you have to degrade it? Or when two things combine, how do you combine them? Do you shove the methods and the data from one process to another, or do you let them battle something out and one dies away and the other one takes over and consumes the other one by just, dumping its object into the other process? I'm kind of debating it.
So, Gerald, in your reading of Nanopond, do you see that as being a genetic programming example?
There was this question that came up, what's artificial life with respect to artificial intelligence? What's the difference? And my feeling is that something about artificial life would have it sort of occupy every available resource if it can, and then when the situation becomes unlivable because everything is occupied, then there's some sort of competition to maintain a position in the available resources. So artificial life is sort of a hungry mechanism, I think, more than artificial intelligence, which is more focused on accomplishing a particular goal. Artificial life, I think, is trying to accomplish its own goal, and that is just to occupy resources and survive.
So, I think the missing link with regards to genetic programming, which was specifically why I asked about Nanopond, is this idea of embodiment. And what you're doing with Darwin at Home is obviously embodying genetic algorithms in something that moves. And the difficulty with regards to genetic programming examples is really finding the embodiment component. I think we have plenty of examples of genetic programming in artificial life context, but they all tend to be a kind of Cold War style abstraction, which doesn't in any way relate to, well, it can in an abstract sense relate to movement, but it doesn't relate to evolving entities that are in some visualized form. And this got me thinking, because I've been talking progressively as we've had people on about Dick Gordon's idea of artificial non-life, and whether the missing element of what Dick Gordon was talking about is ultimately a kind of genetic programming model where, rather than having created joints and a kind of Carl Sims blocky movement genetic algorithm component, you actually have something which is far more random and far more abstract. The real beauty of genetic programming is the vast cull rate initially. In order to get things which are actually functioning and surviving, you need to go through a lot of iterations, and it eliminates all the garbage relatively quickly. And I think with regards to 3D movement, 3D visualization of artificial life, this could be a fascinating method. The question behind that, though, is it a direct representation as it is in something like Nanopond, or is it an abstracted representation as it is in something like Darwin at Home? And I think this is your blind watchmaker metaphor currently, Gerald, that there needs to be almost a kind of internal working in order to represent the external visualization. How does that fit into your thinking, Gerald?
What I'm working on now is something that is intended to sort of let people step back from the idea of a phenotype and just concentrate on the genotype, and then use the genotype to build phenotypes in a variety of different domains. So to disconnect the two into a kind of an abstraction. I'm wondering from Ed, by the way, what he talked about the genetic algorithms as a sort of a search mechanism. Does in what respect, Ed, does it go beyond that, and when does it go beyond?
It's a good question. I don't know about that, but we use it in a way that if you have something simple like, you name a disease, that algorithm should search through, but it's not going to be like a plain text search. It's going to be a relational search and a lot smarter search. It's going to say, well, I know this disease, and can I drive that all the way down to the phenotype of the disease, and then how does that relate to the DNA?
Is there a sense of competition among several?
I mean, several processes running at the same time?
Yeah, like several processes running at the same time, and then one being slightly more successful than the other, so reproducing more often and that sort of stuff. Is that related or not?
Not at this time, but that's my concept to do it. Right now, we just have a single search that I've seen, but I've written a fork mechanism that'll fork out 1,000 of them if I want. So I'm seeing that yes, forking would absolutely be possible and would be a good idea, but it may be straightforward in the work I'm doing at work. But now the work I do at home, I see, a fork of a couple thousand things, and then within each of those forks, another couple thousand things, and they all go down a certain path until we say, okay, kill it for whatever reason, because of the fitness test says, okay, you've reached your end of life, but all those processes still running, and they have maybe another thing that checks and makes sure that all stays running, but not on the same computer. So it's over multiple computers, and they all talk, via, just a simple port communication. So that, if somebody walks up and turns off their computer, well, did my whole organized pond stay alive? And if it didn't, well, why did one computer shut off, kill maybe 1,000 processes that were all unique beings inside the pond? But that's pure randomness now coming into play. So my goal is to capture pure randomness, power going out, but having it spread across, and they all kind of communicate.
And the utility of genetic algorithms in this application is very interesting, because this is also the claim made by the wrong-term intelligent design folk with regards to all these kind of constructions, that basically it's predetermined in terms of the actual creation of the genetic algorithm. And this is the interesting thing associated with the kind of raw application of genetic algorithms. Now, in my own conceptual realm, I think of genetic programming as being considerably more honest in terms of those kind of critiques, but my feeling also is that there is a similar optimization towards a predetermined goal associated with genetic programming. It's just my own naivety associated with that in terms of an additional layer of kind of wonder. Part of Zan's critique was these tools are only a component of the process, and whether you have chaotic noise, whether you have some ordered intelligence either coming through the genetic programs or the genetic algorithms that then manipulates back into the process. I mean, there needs to be additional components in there as well, which broadens the scope of this evening's discussion to the show topic, in terms of purely by creating genetic algorithm examples, the blocky creatures, these kind of things, is that all that is necessary for artificial life? Or is a apparently chaotic environment or things that give a raw selection pressure, are these things that need to be part of artificial life simulations as well? Ed, what's your thinking with regards to that?
Mine is that what I would like to see is that the genetic algorithm, you have like an environment that runs a genetic algorithm that a person may write. So he owns a large series of boxes. They all intercommunicate. They all create this environment, and then another person slaps their algorithm on top of it and kind of intercepts it and mutates it with their per se programming skill. Now, yeah, you have to use the same language possibly, or maybe not, but that would give you lots of randomness. It would take you away from the intelligent design and allow you to have this view of how is true randomness, two different programs, multiple different styles, and they would layer on top of each other, and we just layer them up and up. And so someone would build the foundation, the pond, the water, and then, someone would build the sun, and then someone would put organisms in it, and they would be separate programs, but they'd all be able to communicate, talk to each other, and things would actually, go down because things have to go down. People would shut the computer off and like that and see if it could survive and mutate and then repair itself. but let the program do that. Sooner or later we have to pull the hand out and just let it see if it can communicate and move and repair itself. That's when I think the actual thing is, fully alive, when it can do that.
And what's your thinking with regards to this question, Gerald?
I don't know. It occurs to me. I remember a while ago this idea of embodiment, which is fascinating. Because simulating embodiment in the computer is an incredibly difficult task, and people have created embodied robots where all you do is you have the sensory organism or sensory mechanism and the intelligence inside of one of the individuals, and then you have a whole bunch of individuals occupying an environment. So basically, all the physics of it, all the proximity and the environment is a given. It doesn't have to be computed. You just deal with the information that's coming in via the senses. You don't have to simulate that entire universe. That's the sense of embodiment that struck me the most. With respect to what Ed's just talking about now, reminded me of the EvoGrid idea, where different people are involved creating different things, but the whole is when all the different parts speak with each other. Does that make sense to you, Tom? What he was just describing was several different people writing software and that working and one layering on top of the other. That reminds me of sort of the EvoGrid vision.
Well, in its simplest form, it's something like Core Wars or these kind of environments in its simplest form, but ultimately, that's the dream of the EvoGrid as well. If I could frame the question slightly differently, Gerald, if you saw a simulation environment and things that looked lifelike, do you assume that there would be a need for genetic algorithms, or would you be happy with artificial life to exist without genetic algorithms?
Genetic algorithms are often, really set to accomplish a particular purpose. If you listen to Ed, he's trying to, discover things in huge sets of data, relational things, very, very difficult things to find. Whereas, when it comes down to it, the reason we have biology is because a replicator appeared, something, a molecular pattern that was able to create copies of itself appeared, and that's the end of the story, more or less. You have a replicator, then the world fills with replicated versions of this, and then once that's completely full, then there's a competition to continue replicating, and there's one is more successful at replicating than another, and so you get certain variations that are more successful and start to dominate the population, depending on the available environment and the dimensions of the challenge, if you will. It continues and develops more and more solutions to the problem of surviving. In a way, the genetic algorithm approach is, very intentional, very, very set up to accomplish a particular purpose, whereas artificial life, in one of those Core Wars sort of pond idea, all you have to have is replication and interaction proximity. The selection should, in an artificial life simulation, it sounds like the selection should be sort of automatic because everybody's trying to replicate, and there's no space for infinite replication. Genetic algorithm is sort of implicit in an artificial life simulation where, each replicator is intent upon surviving and occupying as much space as possible.
So I reflect somewhat comically that was exactly my argument maybe 18 months ago when we had a conversation.
Yeah, well, I guess I've come around, Tom.
I guess so. Here's an interesting question back to you, Gerald, with regards to that, because I think the component that has always interested me is actually the life cycle. And when you talk about simulated creatures that have an extended life cycle, for example, what I do in Noble Ape, Ed has, some primary contact with this as well, obviously working at Lilly. In terms of the kind of human or even relatively simple mammalian life cycle, there is so much that goes on in that living period. There's so much subtlety, so much interaction with the environment, so many choices that are made. Is that a component of artificial life as well, or should we stick just purely to the idea of mass replication and then, survival of the fittest and re-replication, or should we start exploring more about the life cycle component, which I think was partially Zan Gill's narrative last week as well? What's your thinking with regards to this, Gerald?
Well, life cycle, if you're talking about a simulated organism, if you want to imitate nature, then there's going to be some sort of, life cycle in which the time comes to, mate and give birth. In a virtual scenario where you don't feel obligated to imitate biology, that life cycle can take on probably very different forms. And in the end, it just comes down, when the environmental challenges are diverse and changing and unpredictable and et cetera, just like it was for biology, then it comes down to just one thing, and that is, can you persist into the future by creating new individuals? Probably the very basic thing about life cycle is just simple idea of a limited lifespan. So that obligates each individual to replicate itself and create progeny. As soon as you introduce a limited lifespan, you've got the challenge in place.
Richard Dawkins, 1976, Memetics. This is obviously, talking to Jamie, he's written memetic simulations, but also, I guess, with regards to things that I've tried to do in Noble Ape, and also when we have Larry on, I'll talk to him at an extended length with regards to polyworlds. There are ideas of culture or intergenerational intelligence, and I'm fascinated to talk to Larry about polyworld mythology, but there are these things that are passed on within the life cycle that carry on past the life cycle as well, that a number of artificial life simulators, I'm thinking about Paul Johnson and other people that we've had on, are interested with as well. How does this fit into your description, Gerald?
I'm not sure. Do you want to frame that another way?
There are artificial life simulations that deal with the formation of societies, culture moving through. Jamie talked about the Whispers, Dawkins' paper. There are these kind of ideas that interest artificial life developers as well. I mean, if you want to look at Biota, for example, that is a classic artificial life simulation, and what it's describing is simple rules for flocking movement. In terms of the context of what is artificial life, there seems to be a group that is just as much interested in multi-agent interaction and evolution through these life cycles as there are through, as you say, with regards to replication of traditional biological genetics as applied in an artificial life context. So, I mean, what's your thinking with regards to that?
Well, there are, of course, a number of different approaches in artificial life. That, on the one hand, you've got sort of the genetic algorithm optimization idea or searching idea, like Ed is talking about. On the other hand, you've got societies and the evolution of cooperation, if you can manage that. And of course, you've got people who are absolutely focused on creating an environment that imitates biology, like Stefan's plants. So there's a whole bunch of different branches and one of the things that seems to be core to it all is sort of the Tierra idea or the nanopond idea, where you've got core wars, you've got just computer code that's battling for survival. So there's all sorts of different approaches to artificial life, different angles.
But if there's a shared theme, what do you think it is?
Replication. That's what I would have to say is core to the whole thing. In a computer, it's fairly easy. All you have to do is say copy. When you have replication in biology, it's a huge amount of work to replicate. I can tell you, I've got kids. Dawkins said it's a rhinoceros is an elaborate roundabout way for rhinoceros genes to produce new rhinoceros genes. So there's replication is big part of existence in biology. However, in the computer, it's dead easy because you just say, well, copy this piece of memory, and then you've got a replica. So the challenges are completely different. It's actually not really fair. In the computer, it's too easy to replicate. But still, replication is the core of artificial life, which is maybe something that is convincing to say that artificial life is natural in a computer. It's very straightforward because copying is something that happens all the time. So if that's the core of life is replication, then the computer's an ideal world for that. So it's really easy.
So Ed, in listening to this discussion, do you have any ideas or questions you'd like to put out?
I agree mostly with it, but I want to add a little few things. What I like is, yes, the lower level components, the atoms up to the organelle stages are definitely just plain out replication. And then if you were able to layer on after you get into the actual organism, if we can get that far and build it, but we'd have to build the organism, to me, on more than just one computer. It has to be on multiple to really feel the changing, and ideally across continents, so there's time delays and other things that are nicely what I call random. They can inject it into the programming environment, so things can't happen all in the same simultaneous second. We're really limited when we work on just one single box. We don't get the benefit of having a huge network of multiple boxes talking to each other, creating that whole environment. And then if you could throw cognitive thought on top of that, that would be very interesting how that would play out. Because if you could, make something decide whether I wanted to eat or not, in the computer you just said, well, you eat, and the organisms eat. When you get down to the lower levels of animals, they eat and they sleep and they do a bunch of basic functions. They don't really seem to show too much of the intelligence of the thought of, well, should I go left or should I go right? I go where the scent leads me, like my dog. We go around the block, he knows to go around the block. He sniffs every rock, and he does it kind of the same repeated pattern. He's not very knowing. He doesn't really think about, well, why do I want to go out today? Should I go in the morning? Should I go at night? If we can get to that
But he selects which rock he sniffs, surely.
Yeah, I don't think she really cares. She sniffs every rock. So she didn't really think too much. She pees in the same spot, sniffs the same rock. So I'm kind of going, well, not much thought there.
I subscribe to a different school of thought that actually, particularly with regards to those kind of messaging systems, which is fundamentally what dogs are doing there, they're actually extraordinarily selective, and the whole sniffing process is actually finding the perfect patch to either mask or carry on a scent. I mean, I think this is what fascinates me with regards to domesticated canines.
My sister used to live in Japan, and they had this little dog, and she would go out, and she described it as the dog checking its P-mail.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we-mail is the concept in Australia, but it's interesting. Okay, so here is the counterexample to this, and I'm surrounded by domestic cats, and we have a domestic dog in the other room, but cats in particular, and there's a lot of stuff with regards to literature on feral cats, are very, very selective about their breeding. And you find this with humans as well. And I wanted to ask Gerald, in the previous discussion with regards to the idea of the Dennett religion fluke and September 11th, I mean, I think humans have an amazing ability to construct realities which stop the replication of other humans in some regard. I mean, Foucault has a lot of writing about the use of religion in terms of birth control in the 16th, 17th and 18th century. But I think even in mammals like cats and these kind of creatures, when they're in their relatively wild form, they do actually have selective breeding, and they do it based on a wide variety of factors. A large portion of them are scent characteristics. But this is something which is more than just raw genetics. This is something which is perhaps to do with intelligence, perhaps to do with things that we don't have scientific knowledge of currently. We have another caller on the line. With 7 minutes remaining, I think I should probably bring this person in.
Hello, Tom. This is Rudolph.
Hello, Rudolph. So, Rudolph, you come in the last 7 minutes, but I'm not sure how much of the discussion you've heard. Welcome to Biota Live for a start.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's the first time I'm calling in.
You attended the first formal Grey Thumb Netherlands meeting. Would you like to give some introductions?
Well, I'm a biologist of the Netherlands. I've met Gerald de Jong for the first time in the first Grey Thumb meeting in the Netherlands. And my main focus is on artificial life, using artificial life as a means to create artificial intelligence. Yeah, I'm very interested in this genetic algorithm that you've been talking about, which I have unfortunately missed mostly. It sounds like a really interesting discussion, Tom, and I'd like to thank you for all the effort that you're putting in.
Not a problem. Not a problem. It's wonderful having folks all over listen in, and I'm interested in your particular insight. Now, I'm not sure if you heard last week's podcast, but Ed works at Lilly, and I know you have a pharmaceutical background as well. I think it's interesting that the kind of grouping of people coming into the discussion, what we were moving towards was an idea that there may be a component of intelligence or maybe something that is sub-intelligent which isn't part of raw genetics that relates to, I don't want to say higher order mammalian species reproduction, but that's basically the direction that I was moving in. And there are things which are interesting to explore, aside from genetic algorithms and the stuff that Gerald was describing, which are fundamentally part of society creating, but also part of reproduction as well. Gerald, it's been a somewhat disjointed way of coming around to this point, but what's your thinking with regards to that?
Well, you seem to think, or you seem to say that it's something beyond the genetics, and that in a way is true, but in a way it's not really true because, at the core of it, the replication is what's happening. It's a big improvement to the sort of genetic search algorithm to be able to mix and match and combine different segments of the replicated genome that where each one of them has proven itself to be effective. So it shouldn't be a huge surprise that most of the higher animals have sexual reproduction because it allows you to combine already successful traits and mix and match them, which is a lot more directed and effective than completely random mutations.
If society as an abstract and changing entity defines what the successful traits are, isn't this the problem in what you're saying?
I'm not sure if it's a problem. I mean, it's the society in that case is analogous to the environment for a bacteria. It just represents the dimensions of the challenge. The way to approach it is the way that the organism responds to the challenge is, in a lot of ways dictated by its genetics, and perhaps you could say it's memetics. I mean, I would argue that there's a lot of memetics that goes on among animals. I've heard about an experiment, for example, where an octopus became afraid because it saw another octopus becoming afraid. So there's a lot of behavioral genetics, if you will, or memetics going on.
Unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes remaining, so I'm going to have to wrap up the discussion this evening, but we'll need to get you all back to continue this discussion because a number of interesting topics have been raised. We also have 2 people in the chat room. I'd like to say hello to them. And next week, we're going to do Spore Till You Snore. I'm not sure, is Mitch going to get a copy of Spore when it's released, Gerald?
Probably.
Because I know the European release date is 2 days prior to the American release date, which is next Friday, hence the topic next week. I'd like to thank you all, Ed, Rudolph, Gerald, for calling in. We'll need to do this again sometime, probably continue on the discussion, maybe even with Zan Gill and others involved. Our topic next week, Spore Till You Snore. You're all invited back onto that one, but we will have Travis Savo as well, and potentially others. Thank you all for calling in.